when it's on the floor, throw it to bed. Right behind you. She'll probably tell you I'm not as risky.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank everyone really for coming out and sharing this afternoon with us on such a lovely day. This is beautiful. I'd much rather be out riding my motorcycle out by Skinny Atlas Lake. I was talking to a gentleman here from Skinny Atlas. I said, man, I want to take that ride out there and stop and go to the apple. Are the apples blossoming? But anyways, no, but really, thank you for coming. And also, too, I want to thank our panel for sharing some time with us and taking time out of their busy schedules as well. And Trish, before I forget, where's Trish at? Trish Body. Trish, she's my assistant, my legislative assistant, and she did a fine job up there. Give her a hand. I'll keep you out of the way before I forget. And the rest of my staff, of course, helped as well, but Trish was the main person that really stayed the course to get this stuff, and I really appreciate her help. And also Joe Heath and the rest of the panelists too were big help getting the panel together for me, so I appreciate them too. So we're looking forward to, the reason why we call this, again, it's a public forum. We can't talk about these kind of issues enough to me. You know, it's such a concern. And then you know, you have to look at the pros and the cons, you know, of everything. That's why we want to try to keep it as balanced as possible. We don't want to, this is not a debate. This is just an open forum. Hopefully you guys have some questions. You know, we don't have a lot of time, but again, we just wanted to give us an opportunity for you guys to come and hear what they have to say, as well as get some questions. You have cards. If you have some questions, write them down and they'll give them to me, and I will ask the questions, because we don't want to make statements and that. We really want to have just, you know, questions and those kind of things. And maybe some of the panelists will be around a couple minutes later and you can ask them individually. Okay? First, let me introduce our panel. Aaron Price, who's a producer of a documentary film, Gas Odyssey. Adam Schultz, who's an attorney. Jeannie Shenandoah from the ONODOGA Nation. We have Jeff Heller, with Steuben County landowner. Joe Heath, local attorney. Christopher Perrette, who's an environmental specialist. Mike Cassetti, Portland County landowner, and I'm told one of my constituents. Stanley R. Scopey, PhD, Sustainable Energy Analyst. Thank you. We're going to go in that direction. And we did it by alphabetical order, first name. Make it simple. Okay, so if we can go in that same order. Is that okay as far as speaking? So, Mr. Price, we're going to have each one to do 5 to 8 minute presentation, or, you know, we'll take it from there. All right? Thank you.
Good afternoon. You are the President of the United States, and you must make decisions regarding the energy security of America. You consult with your advisors, with specialists, and you look around the world to see what other countries are doing, what solutions they are finding. Because a nation's economy is its energy. The shape and substance of a nation's economy is dictated by the energy resources at its disposal and the knowledge and the will to put those resources to work. You look at China. China is on the rise because it's now able to make use of its resources, its human resources, its cultural resources, its energy resources, to develop its economy and society. China is a competitor on the world oil market, a competitor in global business. And unlike some in our country, China recognizes the value of shale, the value of the shales here in the United States, the value of the shales at home in China. Chinese companies are over here investing in energy so China can learn how to develop its own shales. If the Chinese see the value in the Barnett, in the Marcellus, shouldn't we? Energy is prosperity. That is something the People's Republic of China and its billion-plus citizens know very well. China is not the only developing nation eager to develop a role for natural gas. Millions of cars and trucks on the roads of Pakistan and Iran are fueled not by diesel or gasoline, but by natural gas. Why? Because natural gas as a fuel for vehicles is safe, reliable, and reasonably priced. It is easier to fill up a natural gas car in Tehran than in New York City. Easier to find a refueling station for a natural gas vehicle in Karachi, Pakistan, than in Syracuse, New York. The success Iran and Pakistan are having with natural gas cars is a challenge to the United States. More natural gas cars could be here today if Detroit was pushed to make that investment in technology. If our state and federal governments invested in the infrastructure to fuel those vehicles. If the public demanded of Washington or Albany that it happened now. If we were in Iran, we would know many friends and neighbors, co-workers and relatives with natural gas cars, natural gas trucks. How many people in this audience know someone who owns a natural gas car like the Honda Civic GX? Raise your hands. Look around the room and count the hands. Out of all the people here, I see roughly 3 or 4 people who own natural gas vehicles. And yet, with the Marcellus, we sit on one of the richest natural gas deposits, not only in the United States, but in the world. Why is the future happening elsewhere? Once we led the world in innovation, as once we led the world in oil production. In 1970, the United States produced 11.3 million barrels of oil a day. By 2008, we were producing 6.5 million barrels of oil a day. Our oil production peaked in 1970 and has plummeted ever since. And even the resources that remain in Alaska or in the deep waters of the Gulf cannot change that. The oil resources that remain in the ground or offshore are dwarfed by our consumption. We import 12 million barrels of oil a day, every day, 365 days a year. We import more oil than we ever produced at our peak of production. How will we change this and become an energy exporter, not an energy importer? Become energy independent, not energy dependent. The answer is beneath our feet in 1,000 small towns and villages, cities and suburbs across this nation. The answer to today's energy challenges has been waiting for us to find it for hundreds of millions of years. It's the natural gas trapped in shale formations underneath Pennsylvania, underneath New York, under Texas, and other states. The Marcellus Shale, the premier shale formation in the Northeast, contains 262 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. Recoverable with today's technology. 262 trillion cubic feet of natural gas equals 47.7 billion barrels of oil. 47.7 billion barrels of oil that we won't import from Libya, from Saudi Arabia, from Venezuela. The Energy Information Administration estimates that major shale formations in the United States hold altogether 649 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. That's much more than energy independence. That's energy freedom. Freedom to fuel our cars and our homes. Freedom to fuel our lives. And every dollar we send overseas to buy energy is a dollar that might pay the wages of a tyrant's army or reward a corrupt foreign government for abusing its citizens and its environment. Take those energy dollars we send abroad and bring them home. So we are not complicit in repression and partners in destruction with some of the worst regimes in the world. Energy independence is not only a moral choice, but a moral imperative if we are to be good citizens, not only of our country, but of the world. In my film, Gas Policy, I spoke with a struggling dairy farmer who works harder than a dairy farmer and who has struggled more in today's economy. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our farmers in upstate New York kept the corn crop for the dinner table and not ethanol, kept the corn crop to feed humans, not engines, and instead sold us the natural gas from wells on their acreage for our cars and our trucks. Let Deposit New York fuel Deposit New York. Let Binghamton, New York run not on oil from Nigeria, but shale gas from Windsor, from Kirkwood. The technology to make that happen already exists. All we need is the visionary leadership in Albany or in Washington to push it forward. Sadly, many people in Washington, in Albany, haven't thought about energy. Not in depth, not in a serious way. But we have to. The cumulative effect of decades of indecision on energy policy is catching up with our nation. At the pumps, in our economy, and on the battlefield. We don't have the time or the energy to waste. Otherwise, we're going to wake up to an America we don't recognize. An America where the good old days are a memory. We need to plan for the future, build for the future. And it starts here, right under our feet. Not overseas, fighting for oil. Here, with the Marcellus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Thank you. Next is Adam Schultz. Mr. Schultz.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out. Assemblyman Roberts, thank you very much for putting this forum together. My name is Adam Schultz. I'm here. I'm an attorney with a local law firm in Syracuse, Gilberti, Stinziano, Hanks & Smith. I've been doing development work for more than 20 years.
We can't hear you.
Speak into the microphone.
Is that better? Is that better? Okay, good. Yeah, that's fine. I've been doing, Adam Schultz, Gilberti, Stinziano, Hanks & Smith here in Syracuse. I've been doing development work for over 20 years. And what that means is I do regulatory permitting work and environmental impact analysis. And we need to make sure that projects meet the appropriate laws and regulations of the state, and that the state decision makers, when they're looking at these projects and the applications in front of them, they need to be making decisions based on facts and based on science, and not on anecdote and not on emotion. And I have some level of concern that the conversation regarding the Marcellus has unfortunately turned more towards anecdote and emotion rather than facts and science. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about some of the facts and science regarding not only the Marcellus, but about energy in general. Before I do that, it's always, whenever I do this, I always have to ask this question. How many folks here have already decided that they are opposed to hydrofracking? Okay, that's a good showing of hands. Now keep your hands up for 1 second. How many of you have read the 2009 SGEIS put out by DEC? Okay. Well, it's good that the folks who haven't, I encourage you to read it. It's only 800 pages. But you need, it's the DEC put out what's called the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, which is a follow-up to a 1992 study, and it looks at the environmental impacts of high-volume hydraulic fracturing. So, just moving through a few things here in regard to energy. We need to talk about energy because we all use energy. We use it for power, we use it for electricity, we use it to fuel our cars to get here today. So the question is, how do we, what natural resource is the best natural resource to use to provide the power generation and to provide the transportation that our modern society demands? Now, as I said, the major places we use power are electric generation and transportation. 50% of our electric generation in this country comes from coal. Coal represents 27% of fossil fuel consumption and accounts for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. It also emits mercury, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. You know, we have a federal government that has a stated policy, and we have a state government that has a state policy that says we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050. That means we need to replace coal. So how are we going to do that? Well, one option that you'll hear people talk about is wind energy. Wind energy is great. In fact, wind energy has been the largest contributor to the largest amount of new electric generation in the last couple of years has come from wind energy. It's increased by 35% from 2008 to 2009. But the total contribution of wind energy to electricity generation in this country is less than 2%. So even if we double wind, you still only end up with 4% of the electric generating capacity that we need in this country. And I can't help but noting that if you lived in a community where a wind project was proposed, you'll find that people are opposed to it. They're opposed to it on visual impact grounds, and they're opposed to it because the turbines make noise. And this all goes towards making smart decisions about energy. The other, now if you take natural gas, it's 80% lower emissions of CO2 than coal. There's no sulfur dioxide, and there's no particulate. There's no mercury emitted. You also have natural gas-fired power plants in this country that are running at about 50% of capacity. So we have the capacity, and we can decrease the CO2 emissions by using natural gas in these facilities. As the shale plays are developed, whether it's the Marcellus or other shale plays in the U.S., we have more gas, which means lower prices, which hopefully leads to lower electricity costs. The other major sector is transportation. That's where our petroleum goes. We import 60% of the petroleum that we use in this country. And it generates 44% it's 42% of fossil fuel consumption generates 44% of greenhouse gases. We import 60% of it. It comes from, unfortunately, a lot of countries that don't like us. It comes from places like Libya. Nobody's happy about paying $4 for a gallon of gas right now, or we will be soon. But if we're going to keep importing oil, we're going to be subject to these price fluctuations from unstable countries. So what's the option for transportation? You'll hear people talk about biofuels. Biofuels are great, but what's the impact of biofuels? It increases food prices. It takes, at least now, based on the technology they have, it takes more energy input than you get output from biofuels. And of course, it's all currently subsidized by the government, so it's not necessarily the most economical source of energy. What can you do? You heard Mr. Price talk about liquefied natural gas fueled vehicles. They are 25% cleaner burning vehicles than gas-powered or diesel-powered vehicles. If you were to take our large trucking fleets, school buses, over-the-road trucks, and set up LNG fueling stations, there's an easy 25% savings on the emissions. Moving on, so there's a good case for natural gas, but the question everybody has, and it's the right question, is can it be done safely? And if you look at the 92 study and the 2009 study by BBC, you'll find that the answer is yes. I only have a minute left, so let me just run through. All of this information I'm about to run through quickly is right in the study. There's about 1 million gas wells already in this country. They've been The hydrofracking has occurred since 1903. Gas wells have been fracked since the 1950s. Horizontal well drilling, it's not new. It's been going on since 1995. Thousands of wells have been drilled since 1992 in New York. There are other gas plays called the Barnett, similar to the Marcellus. 11,000 wells, they've all been fracked. There's already 482 gas wells that go through primary or principal aquifers in New York. And when they do that, they have to be observed by DEC. EPA has done 2 studies that has found no environmental impact from hydrofracking. 37 states have done studies. Some of the quotes from the regulators, this is not an industry slide, these are quotes from the regulators. There hasn't been a problem with hydrofracking. It can be done safely. My time is up. I will try to address some of the other issues as the questions arise. Thank you very much for your time.
Next.
Hello, my name is Jean Shenandoah.
Can you hear the back?
No.
Can't hear.
No.
Hit the microphone.
Hello, my name is Jean Shenandoah. I live on ONODOGA Nation, which is just down the hill from here, almost a stone's throw away. I've lived in this area all of my life. My family's always been here. All of my people have always been here. This is our Aboriginal territory, our home right here on the crest of this hill. We have been involved in the hydrofracking issue for a while now. It came to our attention and found it very, very alarming. Although there are many people telling us that it is safe and it's going to help us in the future energy-wise, I find it hard to accept that. You see that map there of the leases that have been signed in this area. This area here, ONODOGA Nation and the surrounding area, the neighborhoods all around us, all the people that live around us, many of them have been there for generations, have been there since first settlers came here. We have a lot of fresh water in this area. It's very, very beautiful. I love it here. It's green and luscious and full of trees and beautiful plants. When we heard about this hydrofracking, we immediately started to investigate it, along with many other people who we work along with to protect the environment. The first alarm that I had was when I heard about all of the accidents that had happened, the things, the horrible, irreversible things that can happen to our fresh water. I've spoken to people all over this continent, people that have been suffering the effects of accidents that weren't supposed to happen in their area concerning their fresh water. People that are sick and have sick children. I know there's word that it's affecting animals too, because the runoff has some kind of a taste to it that attracts animals. It's killing plants. It's an extreme danger to the future for our people, our children, our families who live not only here but everywhere. And our people need to make sure that your voice is heard. Put a lot of energy into this to stop it, because some people have endless amounts of money that they can use to do these campaigns. The rest of us are just ordinary people. We need to get our voices heard. There are many organizations that are putting up a resistance to this fracking. We need to defend the environment. Fortunately, the cultural beliefs of my people give me the teaching that we must always consider the Mother Earth first. So there was no second thought for me, no having to make a decision. Immediately knew that it was dangerous and we need to put out the word. I didn't come here prepared to give you statistics. I came here to tell you about the danger that is lurking around, and that we as everyday ordinary people need to work together to do something to make our voices heard. There's actually a rally in Albany on Monday opposed to this. We need to keep it in mind to think about the future. Do some self-assessment on ourselves. What do we think about ourselves and our lives? And are we thinking of each other, thinking of everybody? And our consumerism. We need to cut down things and do more things to make our life so that we're not so demanding and always taking things, always consider things. We always remember to give thanks for everything that is around us. Give thanks for that water that we have now and defend it with all of our lives and all of our heart and all of our thoughts to our future. That's most of the message that I can think about, and there's a lot of convincing arguments that we will hear that it's safe and it's not going to harm us and it's going to make our lives better. But don't forget what a time we're in now, a time of cutbacks. Sure, the EPA and the DEC are observing what's going on, but don't forget how much they've been cut back. They've been cut back. How many people are there in this state to monitor all those wells that they propose to do everywhere around us? Look at that. All we need is one accident there. And the whole area is going to be all messed up. How can we live without water? There are so many places in this world where it's a hardship for people to have fresh, clean water. We need to think about those situations. I also encourage you to go and visit some of these areas that have been fracked. Fracked is a dirty word. I've been there myself. The environmental damage that has been done on the promise of safety and good for our well-being. That's not true. That's not true. That's not be led by all these statistics. Several of us have met with people from all over the country. There was a conference in Pittsburgh not too long ago. There were people there from all different areas of this country that have been suffering the side effects of hydrofracking in their area. There are many movies out there now, many films that people have done right in the homes of people. You see what's happening to them. Their livelihood, their animals are suffering and dying, and they're sick. People are sick. They can't even turn on the water spigot in their own home. And somebody's promising us that it's safe. Somebody's promising us that we really need this. That we need this to make our lives better. Well, my life would not be better if I turned on the spigot in my house and it was a danger to my family, my children, my grandchildren, and I have great-grandchildren. I have to look out for their future. And I'm not only looking out for the future of my family, we need to do this for all of us together. Every single one of us have to keep that in our mind, that we need to get informed about this, keep our mind open, and always keep it in our heart to give thanks for what we do have now and appreciate what we do have. And let's work together to make sure that we always have that. We always have clean, plentiful water to live on in this area. Not only this area, excuse me, everywhere. Everywhere we need to listen to each other. And don't be fooled by all these statistics and these claims that, oh, it's safe, it's going to be all right, you know. I don't think so, because nobody can predict accidents and nobody can predict when things go wrong. We have been given a good mind to think about, maybe we better not do this. You know, maybe we better not do this, because there could be some harm or some danger coming along. and not only of ourselves. Let's all think of each other while we keep all this information coming and attend all these things and come to the rally in Albany on Monday. There's also Wednesday, is it this Wednesday? There's a forum happening. But thank you.
I am with the Steuben County Landowners Coalition. I will be presenting a little bit of a different point of view on this. I have two subjects that I'd like to discuss. The first one is relatively easy. It is Title V of the New York State Tax Code. This might be more relevant to the Assemblyman than it is to most of the audience, but the Title V is something that the Pennsylvania tax assessors would probably kill for. New York State is leap years ahead of Pennsylvania on this one. It sets up a percentage charge on the production of wells. The tax assessor is given that percentage by the state. The tax assessor is given the production of the wells, and the tax assessor collects that money. He takes all that revenue and he keeps it. It stays local. It does not go to Albany. No reflection on the fiscal conservatives in Albany. But it stays with a locality. That's the county, the township, or the town, and the school district. Not necessarily one-third, one-third, one-third. Probably a greater percentage of that would go to the school districts. People, that is a lot of money.
Yeah, drink it.
I wasn't talking about drinking, I was talking about tax revenue.
Who cares?
Keep the comments down, please.
Thank you, sir.
Show some respect.
How much depends on the well and the production of the wells, but generally we're talking about at least $100,000 per well per year. That money gets spent by the local entities and it stays in the local district. Each well would represent $100,000 to $300,000 of revenue a year. Nothing's written in stone there. I recently gave a presentation in the town of Thurston in Steuben County. Their tax assessor said they had one Trenton Blackwater well that was the first year of production, produced the equivalent of $16 million, a $16 million home in the town. So what we're talking about here is a lot of revenue for the local, and that's my point here. It's not whether it's, not many of us are going to drink the dollars. It's that there's a lot of revenue here, and it's going to stay local. That was the easy part of my presentation. The second part is defining safe drilling. Probably the majority, maybe not here from the show of hands, but across the state, I would think that the majority of citizens of New York State will say they are for safe drilling. The problem comes when you start about defining safe. Webster defines safe as free of harm or risk. If you take that definition literally, and you say, I'm for safe drilling, then you're not for drilling in New York State. Because there is nothing in our lives that is safe. In fact, if you take that literally, you really shouldn't get out of bed. There's almost nothing we can do in life that is free of risk. So now we're down, from my perspective, to relatively safe drilling. What level of risk are we willing to accept in gas drilling? What facts do we know about that? Well, I'll tell you what. One thing very basically, a few basic points. there are 14 states using horizontal hydrofracking. 14 states. 14 state departments of environmental protection are content, happy, or endorse the practice. Now, I'm sure some of you can, but I would ask the question as an ex-teacher on an academic level, can you really believe that 14 departments of environmental protection are wrong?
Yes.
I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do it.
2 words, war and Iraq.
The function of the departments of environmental protection, and virtually everybody that's involved in all of it, will be, to be undiplomatic for a second, basically tree huggers. They are people who are for the environment. Is my time on?
No, I'm just standing up to try to please be courteous
Yes.
and help them out and just leave them alone.
I don't hear, and thank you. I can't argue with that kind of an attitude because I don't understand the logic. Are you saying that you honestly believe that 14 departments of environmental protection are corrupt? I don't have an answer for that. We're going to have question and answer afterwards.
You keep asking those questions. They're going to answer.
I'm leaving the door open. I accept that. New York State, the only other thing I wanted to do was to discuss that New York State's regulations on gas drilling were the strongest in the nation going into this. We have to assume that after 3 years of facetious debate or discussion or whatever you want to call it, that those regulations will continue to be the strongest in the country. They'll probably be the strongest in the world. I have to assume that these departments of environmental protection can communicate with each other. The other states have left their regulations open-ended enough that as they did the drilling and as they reaped the benefits of gas drilling, that they could change regulations when they had to. We all know that Dimick had some problems. Those regulations were corrected. Cabot has been allowed to go back to drilling. The DEP stopped them temporarily on a couple of wells, not across the board, just on the problem wells. And the safeguards worked. And they have worked, and I have every confidence they will continue to work. Thank you very much.
Next is Mr. Joe Eaton. Thank you, sir.
Well, I want to thank Assemblyman Roberts and all of you for coming out today. This is, as we know, an incredibly important topic. It's one that our children and grandchildren will pay for the mistakes that we may make as we go ahead over the next year or so in this state. I want to reveal a personal bias here. I have a private well in northern Cortland County in my house that goes into a sole source aquifer that runs from Tully down to Cortland. With about 50,000 people, that's the only source of our water. That area is heavily leased by Chesapeake. Most of your leases are probably Chesapeake. We'll get back to what they're up to in a minute. One mistake in that aquifer, 50,000 of us are out of water. Those of you that live on wells, you know you don't have to think too hard about what your life is like when your well is ruined and you can't use it, you can't shower, your children become sick because of the water. That's what's happened in all of those 14 states. So we have to be very careful here. We have to learn from these other states. I've been lucky enough to be general counsel for the Onondaga Nation since the mid-'80s. And one of the things that I've learned from them is that we all have a responsibility to be stewards of the land and the water, and to make sure that the clean water that we are so blessed with in central New York, as the rest of the world devolves into water wars very soon. We have a third to a quarter of the world's fresh water here in the Great Lakes, and we're about to gamble that away for corporate profits. That's what this is about. And so we need to be... We need to learn from what we've seen down in Dimmick and Bradford County, and I'll get back to some of that in just a minute. In case you hadn't guessed it, my position is absolutely against fracking. We should ban it in New York State, and we should not allow it here. And the reason for that is that it is not safe. We only need to look at what's happened when the drilling companies have a very nice line when they put on their TV commercials and they go out in public. The way to find out what's really going on with fracking is to look at the yearly and quarterly statements that they have to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is where they tell their investors what's really going on. It would be interesting to compare this to what's in your leases, because they didn't warn you about any of these dangers. They didn't tell you what they were going to do under their land. They didn't tell you that when you signed that lease, you agreed to let them store gas under your property. But look at the first paragraph in your lease. I haven't seen one yet. I've looked at almost 100 of them that doesn't allow them to do that. So what they tell their investors, this is taken from a Range Resources filing in 2006. They tell their investors that the industry is subject to many numerous risks, including explosions, fire, injured workers, pollution of air and water wells. That's what they tell their investors, which is not what you hear when they come around on television. And one of the ways to find out what is going on around this, there was an article in yesterday's Bradford County Daily Record. It's a small newspaper in Pennsylvania. Bradford County is one of the heaviest drilled counties in Pennsylvania. Thursday night, there had been a Bradford County Commissioners meeting, and several of the residents got up and addressed that meeting. They talked about 70 to 100 wells that have been polluted and contaminated from gas drilling. They talked about other problems as well, traffic congestion, high rents because the roustabouts that come in from Texas and Oklahoma to do the technical work take the housing and drive poor people out of their housing. They talk about unsafe air. The air is so bad in Wyoming, where this fracking is going on, that the pollution there is worse than downtown LA. It's so bad in Dish, Texas, where there's a compressor station, that people are moving away because their children are waking up in the middle of the night with nosebleeds. The people in Bradford also talked about barium in their well water. Then the citizen said, people want to get out of their homes, but they can't sell them. Their properties are worth 1/10 what it was before the gas drilling started. These are citizens addressing their county leaders. Then it brought up a new issue. I've been studying this for 3 years since Commissioner Grant has called us to Albany to ask us to take a look at it. And this is new even to me. That they had to face skyrocketing electricity bills from having to heat the water in their water buffaloes. When your well is ruined, sometimes the companies agree to bring you water in these large plastic containers. Sometimes. You have to heat those, obviously, because they're outside. And they have to run water filtration systems in their homes. Their bills skyrocketed from $120 a month to $450 in one case, and $150 to $520 a month in another case. This practice is not safe. It ruins wells, streams. I hope all of you read the New York Times series that talked about how they're dumping this frack fluids into their rivers, creating radioactive hazards downstream, highly saline, hundreds of chemicals that comes out of the ground with strontium and barium. That's what's going into the waters in Pennsylvania. There is no place to treat this frac fluid. So it's not safe. It's also not green. You know, we're told because it burns cleaner at the moment of combustion that it's a clean bridge fuel. This is another industry half-truth. It is true, of course, that if you burn methane, it's cleaner than burning coal. However, there are two Cornell professors, Robert Howarth and Anthony Ingraffia, who are about to release a peer-reviewed paper that will be out in about 10 to 12 days that has documented that when you look at the whole life cycle of this production method, from cradle to grave, that it's actually dirtier than coal. So to the original CO2 that you get from burning, you have to add all the CO2 that comes out of the tremendous diesel engines that are run for drilling, 8,000 trucks per pad according to the DEC. But the main problem with frac fluid, frac gas, is the methane that leaks during the production, during the pumping, during the compression. Methane is 72 times worse for global warming over a 20-year period. They have a chart that shows that frac gas, using that analysis, is dirtier than coal from cradle to grave. It's not democratic. We're up against corporations that are huge. Chesapeake, it's not about energy independence. And the way to look at that is you look at Chesapeake has sold 32.5% of their leases in New York State to a Norwegian company, State Oil. They just sold their entire Fayetteville shale, all of their investments in the Fayette shale, to an Australian company, BHP Billiton. They are now making plans to ship this gas overseas because they can get twice as much for it overseas. And these foreign companies will make the profit when they sell our gas. And what we really need in this country is an energy policy, one set by the people that's looking forward with our grandchildren in mind. We do not need to let the energy companies dictate how we're going to create energy. You're not going to solve the global climate problem by switching from one fossil fuel to another. We have to use wind and solar. We have to help individuals put small-scale wind and solar projects on their homes. And we have to understand that this is not a bridge fuel. It's a bridge to nowhere.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I try to use this booming voice whenever I speak. Thank you, Assemblyman Roberts. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my experience. And thank you to all of you as well. I know it's a beautiful day out there and hard to be in here listening to us speak. Look, the reason I'm here, I support natural gas development in the Marcellus Shale. I've been working.
You're starting to fade. Can you get close to that mic? Could you raise the mic up?
I'll just hold it. I thought that would be loud and clear. I support natural gas development in the Marcellus Shale. And the reason is this. I've been working in the Marcellus gas field for the last 3 years, working with several of the oil and gas companies that are developing the shale. And I see the way they work. It is in no one's interest to have a spill. No one's interest to affect watersheds, in no one's interest to affect the single wells of properties that are providing drinking water to all of us and our families. I'm an environmental scientist by training. I did not go into this field because I wanted to see the environment ruined. I'm in this field because I love the outdoors and I love the environment, and I live in central New York because of the same reasons. For years, I have been doing air emission calculations for industrial clients and have been calculating the difference between air emissions of coal burning units, of oil burning units, and of natural gas burning units. And by far, the natural gas burning units are much friendlier to the environment than any of the other fossil fuels that are available. And I have not seen this Cornell paper regarding the cradle to grave life cycle, but I find it a bit hard to believe knowing what the process is of pulling mountaintops off of hillsides in West Virginia, and all the energy that goes into that as well. Look, I wasn't here, though, to just tell you what my opinion was. I thought I would share some information regarding environmental concerns in the Marcellus for all of you. And I wanted to focus on water because that's what I have done over the last 3 years. I focused a lot of my attention on water use and water availability in the Marcellus. Now, each well uses a lot of water, and I know a lot of people are concerned with the clean water resources that we have here in central New York. Between 2 and 7 million gallons of water will go downhole to frack each one of these wells. Now, and I wanted to share, again, the reason why we have to frack. Right? The Marcellus shale was deposited 350 to 400 million years ago when we were under a mile of water here. It was a very brinish sea, and just as in any other bay or estuary in an ocean today, there's clay and sediment from the land that is eroded and deposited in the ocean. In the ocean, there's also plankton and algae and microbes that live at the water surface, and when those microbes die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean. This was a very brinish sea, a lot of salt, very little oxygen. So as those microbes fell to the bottom, they didn't degrade. There was nothing to oxidize them, nothing to break those little bugs down. So they were left in the silt, in the clay, just to kind of fade away in eternity. Now, after millions of years of more material being dumped on top of that shale and the pressure and the heat, those bugs very, very slowly started to degrade. And just like you and I, those bugs were made of organic molecules. Well, those organic molecules, which is carbon chain, carbons with hydrogens and other micronutrients attached, will degrade to methane. And methane is the gas that we're after. Now, in that formation, you've got that tight shale, and you all know that the clay is very, very tight. There's not a lot of pore space in clay, or I'm sorry, not a lot of permeability in clay. You can't get water to flow through it. But there's a lot of little pores, tiny little holes that were filled by the remnants of those bugs that fell in the clay. And all of those little holes, those are the little holes that are now filled with gas. Now, we have to frack that shale, fracture it, connect those little tiny pore spaces in order to extract that gas for our use. Okay, so that's the whole basis of fracking, and that's why we use it. Now, we talk about the volumes of water here, 2 to 7 million gallons per well, and in the work that I've done looking at the growth over the next 10 years in the Marcellus, we're talking on average 1,500 to 2,500 new wells in the Susquehanna River Basin alone, which the Susquehanna River Basin covers probably 2/3 of the Marcellus where drilling activity is taking place. Now, with all that water, that works out to, I did the calculation, it was about 14 billion gallons of water per year. And on the surface, that sounds like an awful lot of water, but when looking at it, we're actually extracting about 20% of the flow of 9 Mile Creek, right out here, per year to feed them. The frac fluid consists of different chemicals that are either surfactants, which allow the sand to move through the fractures, or biocides, which will prevent any fungal or bacterial growth in the well itself. Now, I understand that that's obviously a concern when you hear that they're pumping chemicals down the ground. You're talking about 0.5% of this water, but 0.5% of 7 million gallons, is still a good amount. I did bring with me from Energy in Depth, which I don't know if any of you have seen that website, but they have a nice publication I love to stack up here. It's a listing of different chemicals that are used in the frac process, and I would welcome you to take those so you can take a look at them. A lot of these chemicals are chemicals that we use in our everyday household products. The surfactant that I'm talking about is basically a soap. There's propylene or ethylene glycol, propylene glycol, which would be an antifreeze or the deodorant that we put on this morning. And then, of course, there's acids in there that are used as the biocides to lower the pH. Similar acids to what we use in swimming pools, and then other acids that we might not use in our swimming pool, like a nitric or sulfuric or something like that. Very small amounts. And we're talking about the dilution of that acid in 7 million gallons. It's just to lower the pH of it. And again, and it's my opinion, and I wanted to share that with you, that I'm really not concerned with the amount of those chemicals that are being put into the Marcellus shale, because when you're fracturing in the Marcellus, this formation is many thousands of feet below the water-bearing units. And I agree. Aaron, I can't remember who the first person that was bringing this up, but now I've been involved with this for 3 years. I have not seen one single instance where chemicals that were found in frac fluids were detected in drinking water wells at the ground surface. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about wells being contaminated, methane typically being the culprit, which is gas migration, which happens, aside from fracking, in very, very few cases. Then the third issue with water is the waste management, right? So that water is pumped down the well. It's pumped down at very high pressure, 10 or 15,000 psi. So you can imagine some of that water is going to come back up on the surface. What is it absorbed by the formation? And that's the wastewater that people are concerned with. Right? That's the waste frac fluid, the flowback water is what it's termed in the industry. Now, there are very, very strict regulations on the management of that water, and I've heard people talk about the presence of frac fluids in rivers in Pennsylvania. Have there been spills? Absolutely, there have been a few spills to ground surfaces. There have been truck accidents where frac fluid spills. Are those spills managed? Absolutely, they are managed just as any other spill. We've all seen gasoline tankers go off the road, other trucks go off the road where there's been spills, and the regulatory agencies manage those spills and clean those up. I'm out of time here, so I guess the last thing I wanted to say is I did include some references on this slide, and somebody asked for a reference for the draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement. That's up there. I don't know if copies of this presentation will be available or not, but if they're not, you can come see me afterwards and I'll make sure you get a copy so you can have access to that. So again, thank you very much.
Next up is Mike Bissett.
Can you hear me now? Drilling companies will not be permitted to use misleading letters and dubious legal claims. Drilling companies will not be permitted to use misleading letters and dubious legal claims to bully landowners, said Attorney General Andrew Cuomo. Many of these companies use their size and extensive resources to manipulate individual property owners who often cannot afford to hire a private attorney. This land grab practice must stop. That was from a Binghamton news story from November 2009 in reference to the settlement the Attorney General reached with Fortuna regarding their attempt to fraudulently extend leases. This battle continues today, this time with Chesapeake Energy. Chesapeake has over 600 leases in Onondaga County, 220 of them in this immediate area. In Portland County, Chesapeake has 2,386 leases, about half the land in the county. In the past few years, the gas industry has been quietly acquiring thousands of lease agreements encompassing hundreds of thousands of rural acreage across several states. This is not about a few sporadic gas wells. This is about profit-driven multinational corporations developing the Marcellus, Utica, and other formations for generations to come. We call our home the Finger Lakes region. To them, it's a gas field. Many people who have signed the so-called standard 3-page industry lease now believe they were duped into signing because the known risks to public health and the environmental impacts were not disclosed by the landman. State legislators have indicated to me they will not intervene on these contracts, even if they were acquired in bad faith. Instead, the landowner has to prove there was fraud. And the Attorney General's office is telling these landowners it's buyer beware. The Joint Landowner Coalition lease is about 40 pages, and the DEC State Forest lease is 90 pages. But even leases with the most protective language do not really protect the landowner or the land. The language only provides a legal leg to stand on when something goes wrong. The best lease will be little consolation if your water supply gets permanently contaminated, or you develop the kinds of health problems that are now linked to VOC emissions around compressor stations and well pads. Lawsuits can drag on for years. And in medical-related cases, the victims are often compelled to sign a non-disclosure settlement because they're too sick to deal with a lawsuit. Leases run with the land. Once a property owner signs an agreement, that contract gets passed along to subsequent owners of the property. Moreover, the amount of land under lease will impact how much other unleased adjacent land will get compulsory integrated or taken by eminent domain. The industry wants to hold on to the land as long as it might be useful to them, and the law itself describing how to terminate a lease is as biased as the industry lease. I just successfully terminated my lease. It became official on March 28th, 4 months after my lease expired. The landowner must follow the process described in General Obligation Law 15-304 to terminate an expired lease. Here are 2 vital points to keep in mind. First, you should understand that just because the expiration date printed on your lease is passed does not mean that your lease is terminated. Second, whether your lease has expired or you received an extension letter, in either case, you must assert your rights by making your position known to the gas companies. This communication is related to a legal consideration called latches. So if your lease is expired, you must send a termination letter 30 days after the expiration date, or if you receive an extension letter, you must promptly respond to the company, letting them know you disagree with the extension. The 15304 law says that companies are supposed to provide a cancellation document within 30 days of the expiration date, but they probably won't. Then it is up to the landowner to compel the cancellation by sending a termination notice to the relevant gas companies. The law requires the landowner to identify certain information about the lease and send it certified mail to the gas company. Most of this information is easy enough to gather. Tracking down the lease assignments, however, will take some work. The gas companies will not inform you of assignments or transfers of your lease. You will need to search the public records in the county clerk's office to learn which gas companies have a working interest in your property. It's like a shell game for the landowner. You may think that your lease is with the one company that is sending you the delayed rental payments, but that may not be the case. I was totally unaware that Fortuna had a 50% working interest in my property during the time I was receiving my checks from Chesapeake. Likewise, it was a surprise to discover that Chesapeake had assigned 32.5% of its interest in all the Portland County leases to the Norwegian energy giant Statoil Hydro. Over the course of my 10-year lease, 8 different companies had a working interest in my property. On the advice of the State Attorney General's office, I needed to send termination notices to all 8 of them to be safe. Fortuna changed its name to Talisman, but still operates under both names. And I was advised to send my letter to both at 2 different addresses. In some instances, there is confusion who owns what land and what parcels are actually under lease. I bought my land in 2003, yet as late as 2010, there was no direct reference to my lease filed under my own name. The leasing assignments were filed and linked by instrument number under the name of the original lessor and the gas companies. Both the county and company records may not be entirely caught up with where things actually stand, but it all seems to be organized around the original leasing instrument number. In Portland, a subcontracting company called Mason-Dixon has a person in the clerk's office specifically sorting this out. The companies sometimes even need to clarify ownership among themselves, called a stipulation of interest. Once the termination letter is sent, a second 30-day period begins, during which time the gas companies might challenge the termination by simply filing an affidavit with the county clerk stating so. If they do not file this affidavit within 30 days, only then can the landowner file a termination letter with an affidavit of service. And with that filing, the lease will finally terminate. In Onondaga County, you can't view entire documents online. You must physically go through the books. However, in Portland County, documents are viewable online. Just enter the name of the gas company and click search. It's very interesting to compare the industry lease with the 2006 DEC State Forest lease. You can draw your own conclusions, but it appears the state was in a position to provide meaningful guidance to the public, but instead left us to fend for ourselves.
It's nice to be in front of a group of students. I've been retired for a while. I'm a research scientist, and one of the things I want to talk about is the intersection of science and politics, which is extraordinarily interesting, particularly in the instance of Marcellus shale gas development in New York State and so forth. Before I do that, and I'm going to get to real specific stuff. That's what we scientists do. We drill down, so to speak, into really minutia, but that's what you have to do to understand this. So, to put this in perspective, we heard from Aaron Price, who gave us an extraordinary good look at a big picture. And then we worked our way down to Mike, who talked about how do you deal with these specific things you sign for. I'm going to talk about something to do with water, but before I start, let me just make a couple of comments. I hope I don't run over time with this. The comments about greenhouse gas. I work with Professor Howarth and Professor Ingraffia. Gas is not 80% cleaner than coal. The paper's due out shortly. It's peer-reviewed. It will be a very important paper. High volume horizontal hydrofracturing is relatively new when it's all put together. And it has to be all put together to economically harvest the gas from the shale. You can't do it with just some of that. You've got to have all of it. That's a recent development traceable to 2003, more or less, Texas Barnett Shale Williams Company. Most important is what scientists do is they define what they're working on. So, you like hydrofracturing, you don't like fracking, you don't like hot fracking, what exactly are you talking about? The best definition I know of is complete life cycle definition. It starts when the trucks and the bulldozers roll on and start to build the pad. It ends when, and maybe not even then, the well is plugged at the end of its useful life. Everything in between. It's not just what happens underground. That's part of it. That's only part of it. What I want to do specifically, most of you probably, some of you have seen Gasland. You've seen people light their water on fire. That's what I want to talk about. Methane in tap water. Is it, there it is it natural? The reason is, well, to put this in perspective, there are about 2 to 3 million people in New York State that rely on tap water. That's their drinking water. If it were common or natural in their water, they could have a problem. We'll talk about magnitude, what kind of problem they'll have, they might have. What is going on out there, and this is the interface between science and politics, is there are statements being made that suggest that methane in rural water well tap water is common, it is not toxic, and it's not a problem, and it has nothing to do with, excuse me, gas drilling. And to illustrate that, I have to read these to get them exactly right. I have 3 quotations. This is from a citizen letter to the editor. Long before drilling, he could light his water and hold ice here. Create a flame, as that documentary Gasland did. Are you aware that I can show you 2 residents in this area where you can do the same? The suggestion there is it's pretty common. This is a quote from a press release from a gas company with regard to a problem they had in Chemung County. And their press release, the part I'm quoting says, naturally occurring methane has been evident in the region for decades. Local water quality has been a long-standing issue, far predating our initiation of drilling, even predating the drilling of any natural gas wells in the region. Last quote is from a public official. I'm not naming names here because that would be detracting from what we came here for. And it's here somewhere. Here it is. Methane, that's natural gas, is biologically inert, is a normal, non-toxic component of drinking water in many locations, and developing natural gas deposits from shale poses no risk to water at all. We all have methane in our digestive systems every day of our lives. One recent study in West Virginia found that methane was present in 70% of the drinking water wells. Why are they saying things like this? They're saying that so that if, we hope you don't, have a problem with drilling and have methane show up in your drinking water, you will be inclined to think that that's been there all the time, maybe you just didn't notice it, et cetera, et cetera. That's the specific issue I want to address. How common is it? How prevalent is it? Just ordinary stuff. I don't have any gas wells near me. I live in Broome County. How likely is it that I have methane in my water? My neighbors have methane in their water. And a critical part of this is how much. So, the statement it's not toxic is absolutely correct. It's not physiologically toxic. You can drink as much as you want of methane. It is explosive, however, and it also displaces oxygen. So don't be in a room with high levels of methane, because either you're going to light up and blow yourself up, or you'll suffocate. So it certainly is dangerous. Technically, yeah, it's not toxic, but so what? It's very, very dangerous. People who can light their tap water on fire are at a substantial risk. The specific levels, and I can't, you know, if we had more slides and we were all taking notes, you could get this exactly right. The level of methane you want to be concerned about is 28 milligrams per liter. If your methane, water has methane at that level, it is going to outgas, it will be in your rooms, in your basement, and it's a potential explosion hazard. How common is it out there? It's a scientific question. That is, you go out and you sample a lot of water wells, excuse me, and you see how much methane is in it. It's very straightforward. It's not a matter of opinion, it's a scientific issue. So we can bring science to bear on it. How good is the science on this? Pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. The summary statement that I can make about this, and I'll tell you how I came to that. The paper, the review paper I've written will be soon up at that website, gdac.wordpress.com. The summary statement I can make about this is the best estimate we have in New York and Pennsylvania for baseline prevalence of methane in water, assuming you don't have a well real close to you or other things or all kinds of weird things, just normal, is less than 1%. Where is this coming from? The best study was published about, 6 months ago by the U.S. Geological Survey. They analyzed 1,450 water wells in Broome County, Tioga County, Chemung County. These are border counties just north of where Marcellus drilling is very active in Pennsylvania. Those would be Susquehanna, Bradford, and Tioga counties. So they're right over the same Marcellus, same kind of general geology. The baseline prevalence of water in those 1,450 baseline prevalence of methane in those 1,450 water wells was less than 1%. So it's not common, it's not toxic, but it's very, very dangerous if you have it. Now, how does it get into water wells? Where does it come from? This is an area that's under some active research. There's going to be research coming out very shortly that will support what I'm saying here. There's some support for it now. The science is not as good as I would like it to be. But it comes from generally from three places. If you're near a new gas well, what's near? Specified in Pennsylvania law, near is 1,000 feet. That's a political number, it's not a scientific number. Nevertheless, if you're within 1,000 feet, the water's contaminated, it's presumed the company's responsible. In New York State, the suggestion is either 1,000 or 2,000 feet. That's in the current S-guides that's being worked over. Again, not a scientific number, as best I can tell. It's based on, it's probably far enough away. Let's see, I'm looking at, what does it say? Old eyes. I'm going to finish two more because I'm getting the last word here. If you're near an old unplugged gas or oil well, you may have a problem. If you're near a gas storage field, you may have a problem. Watch out for the politics that get in the way of the science. Thank you.
Round of for all of our panelists. There are 4 mics on the table in front of you with the questions how you want to answer. Don't everybody jump up at the same time. I can read a couple of them that I can read. I can see. Can you give some specific information about where the people are getting sick and how this is related to hydrofracking? Anyone? Can you give some specific information about where people are getting sick and how this is related to hydrofracking?
I can take part of that. The best information we think is coming from both Texas and Colorado. Why is that? They've been in the business of doing this longer. One of the illness vectors is almost certainly fugitive emissions from compressors, pipelines, and that sort of thing, being too close to these things. The one I'm thinking of is it's pretty famous, Dish, Texas. Very small town, 200 residents. They have 11 compressors. Compressors are about 5,000 horsepower engine-driven devices to pump gas around, get it to the right pressure so it goes into the lines and gets to your house and so on and so forth. They also leak stuff. Sometimes that's accidental, inadvertent leaking. Sometimes it's releases that are required to maintain pressure levels so things don't blow up, stuff like that. That's probably the place to look first for health effects due to air contamination.
So when Jeannie and I were at the National Frac Convention in Pittsburgh in November, it was a 2-day event. The first half day was a series of panels of victims of hydrofracking. And we heard from people in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Wyoming, and Colorado, all of whom had their health severely impacted by fracking and the entire process. And what you'll hear from the industry is that fracking doesn't hurt anything because it's 67,000 feet under the ground. What that ignores is all of the surface activity that goes on in order to frack and in order to get the gas out. And so you have these hundreds of chemicals. These are not what you have in your house. How many of you have biocides underneath your kitchen sink? It's not Clorox they use. These are, if they're so innocuous, why do they keep them secret?
Joe, as you well know, every single chemical that may be used, not all, there's a list of 256 chemicals. You can find it in a lot of places. You can find it on the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection website. You can find it on the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation website. Chesapeake has listed this, 256 chemicals. They're not all used in every job because different situations. But it's a misnomer to say that they're kept secret. It's very widely available.
It has not been widely available until recently.
But it is available.
One other thing.
Excuse me, we're not going to turn this into a debate. I have some questions. You guys listen.
One other thing to consider when you're looking at possible pollution from natural gas drilling is to look at other energy sources and their pollution impact. Every time we turn on the lights, probably in upstate New York, we're getting power from coal-fired generating plants. Coal emits mercury into the atmosphere, mercury that ends up in the fish we eat, the water we drink, mercury that gets into our bodies, which causes illnesses. Nuclear power. We're watching what's going on in Japan. When we use energy, we make a choice to use energy, and we should use the best sources of energy that are available. Natural gas can meet any energy need that we currently have. Solar and wind are incapable at this present point of meeting our energy needs, our energy demands. That's a fact. So please, when you look at possible pollution from natural gas, look at the other pollution that is caused by other sources of energy, and look at what energy sources are capable of sustaining the life we live now.
Okay.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, Mr. Stokes.
Very quickly, I think Aaron makes exactly the point I would want to make. That is, we have a problem with fossil fuels. The problem is getting worse. It's going to get worse possibly very, very quickly, and we may not be able to sustain life as we know it or any other kind if we're not very careful here.
Okay. The next question is, says here, domestic gas. Do we really want our federal government to subsidize the natural gas interests of China, Norway, France, Australia, Singapore, Korea, Britain, and it says Chesapeake Energy has sold out U.S. mineral rights to all of them?
If I could address that. Energy is global. The reason energy companies are investing in the United States and the various shale formations is because there's money to be made. Just as our oil companies back in the day, and still now, go around the globe looking for energy resources. Anyone who has a problem with foreign companies investing in American energy must have a problem buying gasoline when they go to the pump. Because most of the gasoline you buy at the pump is from Nigeria, from Angola, from Venezuela, from Canada, from Mexico. So if you have a problem with foreigners investing in our energy infrastructure, in our energy formations, you must then think that countries should not export their energy to us. Because what you're saying is, as long as we have the money to buy energy from someone else, we should buy it. But no one else should be allowed to come to our country and invest in energy. Secondly, where is the energy of the future going to come from? We can use natural gas right now in our transportation fleets. And one of the things that I would like Albany to work on, and Washington as well,
This is not a lobbying session, sir.
Right.
Making natural gas available in local communities to benefit local residents for their natural gas cars, for municipal natural gas buses and trucks. You know what? I don't want this money, this energy, leaving this area. I want it used in this area. And that's why we need good leadership in Albany, good leadership in Washington, to ensure that local communities can benefit from this energy bonanza. Everyone always talks about the mistakes of the past. Why don't we learn from the mistakes of the past and use this energy, which is right here, to benefit our local communities? Why is it not going to happen?
Wait, we're not, excuse me, sir. Again, we're not going to open this up like this, okay? Doctor.
Yeah, again, Aaron makes one of my points, which is not quite that we can use natural gas in our cars, but we sure as heck can use electricity. Electricity can come from wind, solar, hydro, and a lot of other places. Point two, and somehow the subsidy issue got opened up. I didn't quite understand subsidizing foreign countries. It's a very complex matter, but I've tried for the last 6 weeks or so to understand subsidization of our current energy profile, coal, oil, natural gas, you know, the whole 9 yards. This is an extraordinarily dark thicket. I now get a headache every time I look at the pile of papers on this. It's very, very complicated. But what we have here is a historical legacy of subsidizing fossil fuels. This was a good thing for economic development in 1910, 1920, 1930. When my father was a young guy, and he got into the electricity business, because electricity was the thing. Still is the thing, of course. But these companies are mature companies. They've had depletion allowances and other sorts of subsidies, hidden ones you can't even figure out, unless you're, well, a lawyer, I guess, maybe. Joe could do that. But they've had them for a long time. The argument for maintaining the subsidies is extraordinarily weak. That's all.
Thank you. We have have to make these decisions in context. And nobody, I don't think I've heard anybody say today, and I don't think you'll hear anybody say, that natural gas is the perfect solution. It's not the perfect solution, but we only have so many choices in front of us, and we need to make a well-reasoned decision based on the relative risks and benefits of the different energy sources that we do have. Electricity, if we could do electric cars, I'm all for it. I drive a hybrid. But as I said to you before, we have only 2% of the electricity generation in this country comes from wind. So you double it, you're at 4%. That's great. I completely support it. But it doesn't solve the immediate problem. We need to get from fossil fuels to sustainable energy and hopefully to all renewable energy. But we're not going to do it today or next week. It's going to take a period of time. So when we look at the relative risks and benefits of natural gas as compared to other potential energy sources, it comes out on the winning side. So when we have these discussions, remember the context. Unless everybody's willing to say, I don't want to heat my house, I don't want to turn on the lights, and I don't want to drive my car. If we're going to, we need to accept responsibility for the way we live.
The next question is, I have an 80-acre farm which is used for crops. All of my neighboring farms have signed gas leases. What protection do I have if my water is destroyed? What protection as a property owner do I have?
Well, the first thing you should do is you should have your well tested. It's expensive. There are about 8 indicators that you can test for so that you know what your baseline is, so that when they come back later on and say, oh, that methane isn't ours, or oh, that ethyl glycol isn't ours, you can prove that it is. There's not a lot else you can do except get involved in this movement to stop this. Because if all of your neighbors are leased, you're going to be compulsory integrated. What that means is that in New York, if they lease 60% of the area of a spacing unit, they're going to drill there, and they're going to drill underneath your land whether you want them to or not. Now, if you think that's democratic, you have a different definition of it than I do. So what we have to do is we have to all get together and stop this from coming in, because innocent landowners who have worked hard against this practice can suffer the same problems. Their wells can be contaminated. You're going to have truck traffic going by your house at 300 per day. You're going to suffer the harm of this whether you have a well or not.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, you can.
We're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable here. 60% is the minimum that the gas companies can have in leases before they can drill. They cannot drill on your property if you have not signed a lease. They can drill under your property, and the state has safeguards that at least you will get, if you want it. If you don't want it, fine, I suppose you can give it to the tax association or whatever, but you're protected in terms of not losing any money. You're protected by the DEC. Can I finish? You're protected by the DEC if there is any damage to your water supply. And by the way, one of the things that will be in CGIS is mandatory testing of well water before drilling and testing after drilling. And that will stop a lot of what we've seen in Dimmick. What we're seeing down there is people who have methane gas. It's called shallow methane. It's been a problem for a long time down there, maybe not up here, but down there it's been big, long before there's any drilling. Those people will be protected, and that methane, the gas companies have to do something about it, and DEC will require that.
Okay, Mr. Perry, and then Mrs. Shenandoah.
There are regulations there are regulations on the books in both states, in New York and Pennsylvania, and there's a laundry list of compounds that need to be analyzed for each water purveyor, each water supply source within that 1,000 or 2,000 foot radius of a new well, both before and after drilling. Now, one of the things that in Dimmick and in other situations like that, if there's questions about whether or not gas is migrating into a well, There are isotopic analyses that are done on methane to determine the age of that methane. Like you know, there's a lot of naturally occurring methane gas in shallow rock formations where many people have their water wells screened. Any shale unit or any limestone unit, even if it's within a couple hundred feet of the ground surface, will have methane in it. And we see that in wells all the time before new wells are put in.
That's not true. There's no science on that. You can't say that.
What?
Well, we see that all the time. There may be shallow gas. There is almost
Okay,
no gas.
excuse me,
in
Mr.
water
Scobie,
wells.
I don't know if he was done or not, but can we please?
Well, one of the facts, one of the numbers that you threw out there is that there is a background of natural gas in wells less than 1%.
We're not going to, excuse me. Okay, now I'm a politician. Address your comments to the chair. Now, just finish what you answer the question, and then Mr. Shenandoah
I was done.
has the floor. Okay, Mr. Shenandoah.
Okay,
Thank
my
you.
turn.
I'm trying to keep this as diplomatic as possible, and then, you know.
We're trying.
Thank you. I know it's hard.
Okay, they're talking about safeguards. Now, if you're sitting in your home and you do not have a large acreage under you, and they just happen to be drilling on the edge of your property, they could be drilling right underneath your house, and you don't have anything to say about it. You're talking about safeguards. You're in your house with your family, maybe you have children, and you're talking about the natural methane that might be coming through. Does that mean that we should all take a match to our water faucet and see if it's there? Because that's what's happening to those people. I've seen it there. I've seen them where the whole street was all messed up forever. Forever. They took those people out of their homes. I went there to look at it. I went there to look at it because I'm scared, I'm alarmed, and we all need to be. I'm very emotional about this. I'm not a scientist. I can't recite all these things to you. I'm just a human person. I have a family. I'm concerned about what's happening. I'm concerned for those people because they started trucking water to them. They took a family out and put them in a hotel for about 7 months or something, and then just quit paying for the hotel. There was no change. Nothing was any better. They just had to go back to their house. They stood right there when the guy lit the water in my house doesn't do that. And I don't think that guy's water lit up before that either. And now is he going to bathe his children in it? His small children? They love their home. A whole street full of people, families. They're living in a dangerous situation. Nobody's going to come and buy a whole street full of houses where you can light the water on fire. You can't bathe your children. You have to ventilate your house before you turn the water spigot on. Yeah, accidents happen. The whole doggone street gone.
Mr. Price.
I'm very angry about this.
Just one.
That are talking and tricking people and getting them to sign those leases up without disclosing the full truth that people can understand before it happens to them.
Methane migration lasting forever. Certainly, if methane migrates from a gas well, that is a problem. It needs to be vetted, it needs to be taken care of.
Yep.
The one thing I will state is this, though, that if you plug the well, the methane will start dissipating. It will not last forever. There is remediation available for that problem. It is not forever.
Okay, the next question. What is the relationship between hydrofracking and the occurrence of increased radon gas levels in schools, residences, and other buildings? What research has been done, basically?
I don't believe there's any relationship between the gas and the radon. Between hydrofracking and radon.
No research. No research. So that's not a non-relationship. There's no research on the issue.
Okay. All right. Are there information sources online, especially which rate the relative safeties of various fracking materials and show their, where they're in New York State?
Probably the DEC would be the best.
The New York State DEC?
Yeah, if you have any questions, the best source of information is the DEC if you're in Pennsylvania, DEP, because they're the only entity which has full powers to investigate, and they also, they are charged with regulating. They're not a gas company whose interest is in, of course, producing gas. They're also not an environmental group who might have their own agenda in opposing gas drilling. So your best source of information is always your state and federal government.
Can I get in on that? If the question was, what's the toxicity of these various substances, that would not be something I would go to DEC on. They're not toxicologists. They're environmental, they deal with drilling and all that kind of stuff. EPA has information on that. The lookup is probably pretty easy on Google to find out what the toxicity of substances. Now, it gets real complicated here. That's why he's raising his hand, I know, because when they come to the drilling pad, they're very concentrated. And boy, you better stay the hell away from those. When they are used in the fracturing process, hydraulic fracturing, they're diluted. They come back up, they're further diluted by some of this stuff that comes back up with them. It gets a little complicated. There's not good research on the chemistry of this stuff, and it varies in different geologies and different places. So the best one can say about it is it's a heck of a lot safer when it's being used to fracture than it's when it is in its concentrated form.
I think we might be able to agree on one thing, and tell me if I'm wrong, but the DEC has a list of chemicals that are used in fracturing processes available online. And if you went to a website, it's NIST, it's the National Institute of Science and Technology, .gov, I believe. You can get fact sheets on any one of those chemicals that talks about the toxicity level and what concentration that chemical might be harmful.
Just one quick to Professor Scobie's point. The issue of the chemicals at the site is an important issue. A couple of things. The DEC, and it's in the 2009 study, but it's been part of the regulations since 1992. There are a couple of things that are relevant here. But when you develop a pad, you need to have what's called a stormwater pollution prevention plan, and you also need to have what is called a spill prevention control and countermeasure plan. You'll hear SPCC. If that's what you hear, that's what that means. What that means is that the companies are required, before they are issued a permit to drill, to have a plan in place that's been reviewed and approved by DEC as to how they will handle any accidental spill at the site. So, again, context. Yes, it's an issue. Yes, we need to be very, very careful about it. But DEC has thought about these things, and they're well-established plans, and they're in place at the site. It's not an uncontrolled situation.
Well, let's talk about DEC for a minute, because they have the same three conflicts that the Minerals and Management Service had in the Gulf. They are required to promote the development of gas, then to regulate it. That's pretty contradictory. They're also leasing state forests for profit. They have 17 people in their minerals section to handle all of these things. There is not one new regulation in the SGUTs. So all of this stuff about great regulation goes up in smoke. It's not going to be well regulated. And what Pennsylvania has had to do in the last 3 years is try to catch up. They have many more people. They have hundreds of people trying to keep up with this industry now. We have 17. That's why Pete Granis was fired last year, because he had the nerve to tell the governor, if you cut our staff 10% more, there's no way we can regulate this industry. That's why he was fired.
So please bear with me, and we have to wrap this up. How does, this one here, several people asked in different ways, but How does this compulsory integration factor in for people who don't have leases, also for communities in the area?
I can take a shot at that. Let me give you my background. I wrote the opposition brief to the 2008 horizontal drilling enabling legislation. So I'm pretty good on most of the aspects of gas and oil law in New York State. It's very interesting. That's an important question. Municipalities own land. That land can be compulsorily integrated. That is, you don't have a choice because we've got the 60% adjacent and so on and so forth. You heard the other story about this. There was the first part to that. I was talking to somebody. And I lost my train of thought on the second part. The communities can certainly lease the land themselves. In some cases, the law is messy on that, and it applies differentially to different counties. And that gets very complicated, but they can generate money from a lease. The one thing about compulsory integration that's important, you should all remember, is if you're compulsorily integrated, they can't come on your land. If you sign a lease, it would be extraordinarily if you got a no-surface agreement on a lease. They want to be able to come on your land. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe put a pipeline in, maybe not. Put a well in, multiple wells on a drilling pad. Depends. With compulsory integration, if you accept the royalty option, the head in the sand option, just don't do anything, let it happen. You don't get a lot of royalty money, but they don't come near you either. And that's of considerable value. I think there was a first part to that I missed. Could you reread that?
Well, let me move on to sure. Again, I just have a couple more, because we really have to wrap this up. Yeah, I'm not trying to do anything. But let me explain real quick. What I'm going to do is, what I'm going to attempt to do is all of these questions, we're going to type them up. I'm going to present them to each one of you guys. And if you would please, if you want to respond, if you don't want to respond, do that. But I will also post them on my website. Okay, so you guys can have them, review them, and however you want to do it. And I think because I got hit with a whole lot of them, which is very good. Okay, so we're going to do this. Another question is, please explain the Halliburton exclusion.
In 2005, Congress passed the Energy Act, which, along with a lot of previous legislation, exempts the oil and gas industry from most of the provisions of most of our federal environmental laws. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Drinking Water Act, Superfund. No other industry can inject toxic chemicals into the ground without a specific permit from EPA. They were exempted from that. And so
it's not an exemption. You can't be exempted from a law that never regulated you. Let's be people call it the Halliburton exemption, but let's be clear what that is. We're talking about the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Safe Drinking Water Act, the relevant provision is what's called the Underground Injection Control Program. The reason that hydrofracking is not regulated under that statute is because it was determined by EPA that hydrofracking is not underground injection. Underground injection is
Excuse me, you guys have been great. Don't make me have to throw you out here. Just be courteous. You've been great. I know it's tough. Please, thank you.
It's not my opinion. That's what the law is. I didn't write it. But it's underground injection for storage purposes. Because hydraulic fracturing is not intended to store anything, it's the opposite. It's meant to extract gas. It's not subject to the regulation. So, again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. We're running out of time. Please, I'm not trying, but before you form your opinion, go research it. Find out the answers. There's a lot.
Excuse me.
Please,
I ask you again, please be courteous. Okay, seriously.
I'm not asking anybody to be in favor of it. I'm not asking anybody to be against it. I am asking that you take the time to educate yourself so you can make an informed decision. That's the only way we can do this as a society. We have to make these decisions.
Well, we're here. Since you interrupted me, I want to finish. I want to finish. You interrupted me.
Hold on one quick second. Because I jumped the gun, and he wanted to respond to the last question too.
I want to answer that, okay?
Okay,
I'll
all right,
be very
okay,
brief. I'll
all
be
right.
very brief.
Okay.
The same companies who tell you we're not storing it underground, when they try to defend the problem with all the frac fluids that come out of the well, they put about 8 million gallons per frac, they tell you, oh, only 20% of it comes out of the ground. So that means that 80% is kept underground stored. Now, a lot of that comes back out eventually, but these chemicals stay in the ground.
One thing I would,
You want to respond to the last question, or you want to let that go? The one that you asked and I've forgotten.
That's okay. No, the last one, it was in regard to compulsory integration. It's a statewide law. It applies equally across all parts of the state. It's in the environmental conservation law. You can find it in Title 23. And the last point there is that, remember what a lease is. A lease is a contract. A contract takes two parties. If you don't want to lease, you don't have to. If you want to do a lease that says you can't drill on my property, but you can extract the gas out from underneath it by drilling on somebody else's property, you can do that. But the idea of the lease, it's a contract. You don't want it, you don't have to agree to it. It's not a big issue.
one thing I would just add is that when you look at the whole issue of fracking, chemicals used in fracking, how many people in this audience have ever wondered what chemicals were used to make the computers you use? What chemicals were used to use your cell phones? Every single one of us.
Put your hands down. Put your hands down.
Well, when you talk about stay on the subject, it's so easy for people in the environmental movement, in any movement, to attack gas drilling, to attack it for the energy we need. But what they refuse to do is to look, for instance, at the computer industry, all the pollution caused by that. They refuse to look at the pollution caused making cell phones. Yeah, do you know where the minerals, the metals that go into your computer, where they're made, how those minerals are mined? Look into that, and I think you will find that there are many industries in America which have a track record even more troubling than the gas industry. Consider your own footprint. Don't just attack one industry. You're going to be consistent. Don't just dump on the gas industry. Look at other things in your life that you use.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up at this point. And again, write down the address, and again, we'll get all this stuff squared away as quickly as we can. Again, I want to thank you for coming out and being a great And I want to thank our host, ONODOGA Community College. Is there any representative here from the college? Well, anyways, I'm an alumni here, so I'll take a greeting for that. Thank you, and get home safely. Enjoy the rest of the day.